Welcome back to the deep dive. I hope you're ready to think, because today we are wading into some arguably heavy waters.
We are. Yeah, wading might be too gentle a word. I think we're diving into the Mariana Trench of human experience today.
And I want to be really clear about this right off the bat. These are waters that pretty much every single person listening has had to swim in at some point.
Oh, absolutely.
We aren't talking about abstract philosophy today. We're talking about the messiness of life.
Exactly. We're talking about the stuff that actually keeps you up at night.
Right. We're talking about anxiety. We're talking about trauma. We're talking about those moments where you are waiting for something that just isn't happening, and the big silent questions that come up when you pray and you just hear silence.
It's the intersection of human struggle and faith. And what's so interesting about the stack of sources we have today is that we're not just looking at this from one angle.
Right.
I mean, usually we might look at a theology textbook, which can feel a bit cold, a bit academic, or we look at a psychology manual, which might miss the spiritual dimension entirely. Today, we are mashing those two things together.
It's a really eclectic mix. We've got transcripts from a fantastic podcast called With You in the Weeds, which is hosted by a Christian counselor and a theologian, so you get both perspectives right there.
A perfect blend for this topic.
It is. Then we've got academic journals on rhetoric, specifically analyzing how people rhetorically defend God when prayers aren't answered.
Which is a fascinating question in itself. How do you construct that argument?
Totally. We've also got Wikipedia entries on biblical metaphors, which sounds dry, but it's not, deep dive commentaries on the book of 1 Samuel, and even some notes from a biblical counseling conference, so it's a wide net.
It's a very broad spectrum, but I think it's necessary for a topic this big. You can't just come at it from one direction.
You really can't. And the mission today is to unpack how all these different sources attempt to reconcile the messy parts of life with religious belief. Because let's be honest, there is often a massive gap between what we think the Christian life is supposed to look like.
Right, the highlight reel.
The highlight reel, victory, peace, clarity, Instagram perfect families, and what it actually feels like on a Tuesday morning when you're having a panic attack in your car on the way to work.
Or when you've been praying for the exact same thing for 10 years with just zero results. That gap creates a lot of dissonance, a lot of spiritual friction.
Exactly. So we're going to look at the psychology of faithful suffering. We're going to dive into the arguments people use to explain why God might say no, and this really fascinating concept of waiting as a muscle you build, not just a delay you have to endure.
And then later on, we're going to get into some real detective work. We're going to tackle a mystery that has puzzled scholars for literally centuries. Paul's infamous thorn in the flesh.
I love a good historical mystery. This is one of the big ones.
It's a classic. Was it a disease? Was it depression? Was it a person?
We've got sources arguing pretty convincingly for all three.
Okay, I'm already hooked on that. But before we get to the mystery, we have to start where our sources start, with this concept of the weeds.
Yes.
Let's do it. So this comes primarily from the With You in the Weeds podcast sources. And I just love the title because it's so evocative, being in the weeds.
It's actually a restaurant term originally.
Is it?
Huh.
I always thought it was a gardening metaphor.
Well, literally, yes, of course. But in the restaurant industry, when the kitchen is completely overwhelmed, tickets are piling up, the chef is screaming, and you just can't see a way out, that's when you say you're in the weeds. It implies a complete loss of control.
Wow. Okay, that feels incredibly appropriate for this conversation.
I think so, too.
Yeah.
And in our context, the hosts, John Tinnen, who is the theologian, and Lynn Rush, the professional counselor, they define it as that messy middle ground between where you are and where you want to be.
It's the gap between the promise and the reality.
Yeah.
It's the space where all the hard stuff happens.
And they take this dual approach we mentioned. They're constantly integrating psychological principles with theology. And one of the biggest weeds they talk about, and this really resonated with me, is the anxiety that surrounds the will of God.
Oh, this is huge. This is a big one for a lot of people.
It is. I think so many people feel this paralysis. The source describes it as a modern paralysis regarding decision-making. We are terrified of missing God's perfect plan.
Right. It's this idea that there's one single golden path, and if you make one wrong turn,
you've derailed the entire train of your life. It's like, if I take the wrong job or date the wrong person or move to the wrong city, I have somehow thwarted the Almighty, and now I'm on plan B forever.
Exactly. You think, I missed the exit 3 miles back, and now my life is just a detour. I'm doomed to a second-rate existence.
I'm doomed to a second-rate life because I chose the Honda instead of the Toyota. It sounds absurd when you say it out loud, but that's the feel.
It is the feeling. And it's a terrifying way to live. It creates this hypervigilance where every small decision feels like you're a bomb disposal expert trying to decide whether to cut the red wire or the blue wire.
Yes, and one wrong snip and everything blows up. So how do they solve this? Because you can't just tell an anxious person, don't worry about it. That has never worked in the history of the world.
No, that's probably the least helpful thing you can say. You need a framework. You need a new way to see the problem.
Yeah.
And the source breaks this down beautifully by introducing a theological framework of 3 wills.
Okay.
And their argument is that if you understand these distinctions, a lot of that anxiety actually evaporates because you realize you aren't nearly as powerful as you think you are when it comes to messing up God's plan.
Okay, I'm intrigued. That sounds counterintuitive, but also really freeing. Let's unpack these. The 3 wills. What is number 1?
So the first one is what they call the will of decree. This is God's sovereign plan. The big stuff. The stuff that cannot, under any circumstances, be thwarted.
So what does that include?
Think of it as the bedrock of reality. The laws of physics, the grand sweep of history, the ultimate redemption of the world. You, as a single human being, simply do not have the power to break this. It's the cosmic architecture.
Okay, so that's comforting. I can't accidentally ruin the universe by taking a job in Cleveland.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are not powerful enough to stop the sun from rising. You aren't powerful enough to stop God's ultimate plan for humanity from unfolding. That's the will of decree. It's the macroscopic view. It's the stuff that is completely outside of your control.
Got it. Okay. What's number 2?
Number 2 is the will of desire. This is much more personal. These are the moral commands that you find in Scripture.
So the 10 commandments, love your neighbor, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Don't steal, love your neighbor, be honest, be compassionate. This is what God desires for you to do, how he wants you to live. Now, unlike the will of decree, you can break this one.
Right. I can absolutely choose to steal something. I have that freedom.
You do. You can choose to be hateful. You can choose to lie. Humans violate God's will of desire all the time. This is the realm of morality, of sin versus righteousness. And it's usually pretty clear-cut, right? Most of the time, if you're about to lie or be cruel.
Okay, so will of decree is the unchangeable cosmic plan. Will of desire is the moral rule book. What's the third one? Because this must be where the problem is.
This is exactly where the problem is. The third one is the will of direction. And this is where we all get stuck in the weeds.
This is the Honda versus Toyota problem.
It is 100% the Honda versus Toyota problem. The will of direction concerns all those specific life choices that aren't explicitly moral. Which job do I take? Which house do I buy? Who should I marry? Should I move to Chicago or stay in New York?
And the source argues that this is where Christians, in particular, often just freeze. Why? Why does this category cause so much paralysis?
It's because they are treating the will of direction like it's the will of decree.
Ah, okay. Unpack that.
They act as if there's only one specific right option for them in the entire universe, a hidden bullseye that God has predetermined. And if they miss it, they are doomed. They think God has a secret microscopic script for their life, and their job is to somehow decode it perfectly.
It turns life into a scavenger hunt where all the clues are invisible. Guess which job I want you to take. Ooh, wrong guess. Enjoy a life of quiet misery.
It makes God seem kind of cruel.
It does. It makes him seem like a cosmic trickster. And that view of God is what causes the profound anxiety. But here is the liberation that the source offers. They argue that the will of direction is actually an area of freedom.
Freedom? How so?
Yes. The source argues that God doesn't expect people to decode a hidden blueprint. He expects them to use wisdom in relationship. The idea is this. If you are operating within the will of desire, meaning you aren't sinning, you aren't stealing to get the job, you aren't being malicious in your decision, and you are actively seeking wisdom, then you just choose.
You can just pick.
You can just pick.
That feels almost too simple, like there has to be a catch. But that's the point. We've overcomplicated it. God is essentially saying, look, I gave you a brain. I gave you desires and talents. I gave you wise counsel. As long as you stay within the moral boundaries I've set out, the will of desire, then I will bless the path you choose.
So it's less about finding the one right door and more about just walking through a good door.
Exactly. The source suggests God is actually standing beside you saying, use the brain and the heart I gave you, and let's go. If you pick the job in Chicago, I'll be with you in Chicago. If you pick New York, I'll be with you there too. Let's make it work.
That is a massive shift in perspective. It really takes the pressure off. It means you don't have to be a psychic to be a faithful person. You just have to be a wise and moral one.
That's the takeaway. It moves the focus from decoding secrets to developing character.
But, and here's the but,
Yeah.
sometimes the anxiety isn't just about making a decision. It's not cognitive. Sometimes it's just a tidal wave. It's physiological.
Yeah.
The source spends a lot of time on panic attacks. And I really appreciated this part because, in some religious circles, mental health can be a bit taboo, or at least misunderstood.
Massively misunderstood. And this is where that integration of psychology is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are absolutely right. In some religious circles, a panic attack is treated purely as a spiritual failing.
Right. The narrative is, if you just had enough faith, you wouldn't be anxious. Anxiety is a sin. You need to pray more.
Just pray it away, or you must have some unconfessed sin.
Right. But with You in the Weeds team, with the counselor and theologian, they break down the actual mechanics of a panic attack. And they argue that before you can even begin to deal with the spirit, you have to deal with the hardware, the body.
You have to understand the machine you're living in.
Exactly. They talk about the brain structure here, specifically the amygdala versus the prefrontal cortex.
Yes, the classic security guard versus the CEO dynamic. Such a helpful metaphor.
Break that down for us. What does that mean?
So your amygdala is the security guard of your brain. It's this ancient primal part responsible for one thing: survival. Fight, flight, or freeze.
The alarm system.
The alarm system. And when it senses a threat, and this is key, whether that's a real tiger in the bushes or just a stressful email from your boss, it slams the big red button. It doesn't differentiate. It just dumps adrenaline and cortisol into your system.
And that's when your heart rate goes up, your palms sweat, your vision narrows. You're in survival mode.
You're in full-blown survival mode.
Yeah.
And here's the crucial point the source makes. When the security guard takes over, he locks the CEO out of the office.
And the CEO is the prefrontal cortex.
Exactly. The CEO is the part of you that thinks logically, that reasons, that prays, that reads theology, that makes complex moral decisions. When you are in a panic attack, that part of your brain is literally biologically offline.
So you cannot think your way out of a panic attack.
You can't. The part of your brain that thinks isn't working at full capacity. It is being suppressed by the flood of stress hormones.
That explains so much. It explains why telling someone who is hyperventilating to just calm down or just think about this Bible verse is completely and utterly useless.
It's worse than useless. It's actually shaming. You're asking them to do something their brain physically cannot do in that moment. You're telling a person whose legs are broken to just get up and walk it off.
So what do the sources suggest then? If we can't think our way out, if we can't use the CEO, what do we do?
You have to use what they call bottom-up processing. You have to speak to the body first, not the mind. You have to calm the security guard down.
So grounding technique.
Grounding techniques, things that regulate the nervous system. Deep, slow breathing, especially a long exhale, which signals to the vagus nerve that you are safe. Touching something cold, like an ice cube. Looking around the room and naming 5 red things you see.
You're basically using your senses to prove to the security guard that there is no tiger in the room.
That is exactly what you are doing. You are calming the physiological system. And the source really emphasizes this point. This is not an unspiritual act. Tending to your body, treating your body with dignity and understanding its mechanics is a spiritual act. It's moving yourself from survival mode back to a place where you can actually connect with God.
I think that distinction is so helpful. It stops that shame spiral. If my heart is racing, it doesn't automatically mean I'm a bad Christian. It means I have adrenaline in my system and I need to deal with the adrenaline first.
And once the system is calm, then you can do the spiritual work. Then you can bring in the CEO.
Yeah.
But you can't do deep theological reflection when you think a tiger is chasing you.
Speaking of deep work, once the tiger is gone, we sometimes have to deal with the people who might have let the tiger out of its cage.
Yes, we do.
We have to talk about forgiveness. This was another major topic in the source material, and it's a thorny one.
It's so tricky because forgiveness is another one of those words that gets weaponized in church culture. It gets flattened into this simple command: you have to forgive and forget.
Right. And if you don't, you're the one who's bitter or unspiritual. The source was very, very specific about what forgiveness is not.
And this is critical. They argue, first, forgiveness is not forgetting. Your brain doesn't just delete painful memories. That's not how it works.
Okay, so it's not amnesia.
It is not amnesia.
Yeah.
Second, it is not minimizing the hurt. It's not saying, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. Real forgiveness requires you to look at the full extent of the wound and acknowledge how much it hurt.
You have to be honest about the pain.
You have to be. And third, this is the big one. It is not forcing a return to normal. It is not automatic reconciliation.
That's the one I think gets confused the most. The idea that if I forgive you, we have to go back to being best friends, or I have to let you back into my life in the same way.
Correct. And mixing those two up causes so much damage. The source makes a clear distinction. Forgiveness is an internal release of a debt. It's you, inside your own heart, saying, I am no longer going to try to make you pay for what you did to me. I'm letting go of my right to punish you. That can happen entirely inside of you, whether the other person is sorry or not.
Okay, so that's for my own freedom, really.
It is. It's about unchaining yourself from the person who hurt you. But reconciliation,
That's different.
that's the restoration of trust. And trust requires two people. It requires repentance, change, and safety. You can forgive someone from 1,000 miles away and never speak to them again if they are an unsafe person. Forgiveness is mandatory for the believer. Reconciliation is not.
The source used a really interesting metaphor for how to handle those unsafe people through boundaries. They called it the speed bump.
I love this. It's such a practical image.
Explain the speed bump.
Okay, so often we think of setting a boundary as being mean or unloving. We think, if I truly love this difficult person in my life, I should just be an open road for them. I should be endlessly accessible and patient.
Right. Just absorb the bad behavior.
Yes. But the source argues that if someone is driving recklessly in your life, constantly hurting you, taking advantage of you, being destructive, being an open road isn't love. It's enabling.
You're basically helping them crash their own car.
You are. You're co-signing their destruction.
Eh.
So what a loving person does is install a speed bump, a boundary that's clear consequence. If you scream at me on the phone, I will hang up. If you show up drunk, you will have to leave. If you criticize my parenting, we will end the visit.
And that consequence is the speed bump.
It's the speed bump. It arrests the bad behavior, it forces the car to slow down, and the driver to become aware of how they're driving.
So the boundary, in a strange way, actually has the potential to protect the relationship in the long run.
It protects the relationship. And it actually loves the offender by refusing to let them destroy themselves and everything around them. It says, for the sake of us and for your own sake, I cannot let you act this way in my life anymore.
That completely flips the script on how we usually think about turning the other cheek. In this model, the loving thing to do is to stop the cycle of harm.
Flipping the script is actually a phrase they use in another context too, specifically regarding trauma, in an episode with a guest named Jules Lundberg.
Right. This was powerful, the idea that trauma writes a narrative, a script in your head.
It does. Based on what happened to you, your brain writes a story to make sense of the world. And that story might be, I am unsafe, I am unlovable, I am powerless, people will always abandon me.
That's the script, and if you don't interrupt it, you will live out that script for the rest of your life. You'll keep seeking out situations that confirm it.
Exactly. And the work of faith and therapy combined is to consciously rewrite that internal narrative, to look at the complete and total loss of your past and find a way, through grace and hard work, to turn it into life transformation.
So it's not about erasing the past, because you can't. It's about changing the meaning you assign to it and the story you tell yourself about it.
Precisely. You take the pen back from the trauma and start writing your own next chapter.
Okay, so that's the internal world. That's anxiety, panic, forgiveness, trauma. That's the work we do inside ourselves and with others. But what happens when we take that internal struggle and direct it outward, toward God, in prayer?
Oh.
And specifically, when God doesn't answer.
Right. Now we are moving into our second stack of sources. This is where we bring in the Cornerstone Journal study on apologia and the work by Jerry Sittser, The Gift of Unanswered Prayer.
This is the rhetoric section, and I wanted to find that word because it sounds academic, but it's really not. We're talking about apologia.
Right. And it's important to say, in this context, apologia doesn't mean apologizing like saying you're sorry.
No.
It comes from the Greek word for defense. It's a rhetorical strategy used to defend a position or a person. In this case, the authors of the journal are looking at how popular Christian writers defend God against the accusation of being silent or unresponsive.
Because the accusation is a fair one to make, right? I mean, the Bible is full of promises, and the source quotes this, ask whatever you want and it will be done for you. That sounds like a blank check.
It absolutely does.
But in reality, we ask, and often we don't get. So there's a huge gap.
That is the core conflict. The dissonance between the promise and the reality is where a lot of faith gets shipwrecked. So The Cornerstone study analyzed a bunch of popular Christian literature to see how these authors solved this problem. How do they get God off the hook, so to speak?
And they found a few common strategies. The first one is, well, it's kind of rough. It's blaming the prayer.
Yes. This is by far one of the most common defenses. If the prayer wasn't answered, the fault must lie with the human, not with the divine.
So it's my fault.
It's your fault. The study lists the common reasons given in these books. You have unconfessed sin, you don't have enough faith, your motives are wrong, you're being selfish.
There's even one quoting Philip Yancey about a lack of social concern, that your prayer wasn't answered because you don't care enough about the poor.
Right. The implication is that your spiritual channel is blocked by some personal failing.
Which, to be fair, puts a massive, almost unbearable burden on the person who is already suffering. If I'm praying for my sick child and they don't get better, this line of reasoning suggests it's because I didn't have enough faith. That's just crushing.
It is crushing. And from a rhetorical standpoint, you can see why it's effective. It protects God's reputation. He is still all good and all powerful. You are just the broken link in the chain. But pastorally, in the real world with real pain, it can be devastating.
Absolutely. But the sources also point to a second, more nuanced strategy, a different way of explaining the silence.
Yes, the higher purpose defense.
And this is where Jerry Sitzer's work comes in. He argues that sometimes God's no is actually a form of divine protection.
Exactly. He tells this haunting story from Tolstoy.
Yeah, tell us that story.
So there's a mother whose young son, Kostya, is dying of a fever. She is just frantic. She prays with this fierce, desperate energy. She refuses to accept his death. She essentially tries to bend the will of God to her own, praying and demanding that he recover.
And he does. Her prayer's answered.
He recovers. And then the story follows him as he grows up, and he becomes a monster, a cruel, selfish, destructive human being who brings misery to everyone around him.
Ooh.
And the dark implication of the story is that the mother's answered prayer, by overriding the natural course of events, actually led to a much worse outcome for the world.
So the argument is, God sees the whole timeline. We only see this tiny little snapshot. So if God answered every single one of our prayers with a yes, we might inadvertently create hell on earth.
Sitzer uses the phrase, spoiled children with a loaded gun. If we got everything we wanted, we would be like toddlers with immense power. We would use prayer to shape the world according to our own selfish, short-sighted, limited vision.
This leads directly into what they call the winner-loser paradox. This was fascinating to me because you see this in sports all the time.
All the time. The soccer match scenario.
Exactly. You have two parents on opposite sidelines. Both are devout Christians. Both are praying with all their heart for their kid's team to win the championship game.
It's a zero-sum game. There can only be one winner. So for parent A's prayer to be answered, Lord, let us win, parent B's prayer, by definition, must be denied.
So what does God do?
It's a paradox.
Yeah.
And the source extrapolates this out to something much more serious. War.
Right. You have Christians in the United States praying for victory, and you have Christians in a hostile nation praying for their victory. Or think of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. You had Protestants and Catholics both praying to the same God for the defeat of the other side.
Who is God supposed to listen to in that situation?
So what is the conclusion there? I mean, does God just flip a coin or ignore both of them?
The source suggests that prayer cannot simply be a mechanism for satisfying competing human desires. If prayer is just a celestial suggestion box for asking for things, it completely collapses under the weight of this paradox.
It has to be something more than that.
It has to be. Sitzer argues that the unanswered prayer in these cases is necessary. It prevents us from treating God like a cosmic vending machine, or worse, a weapon to be wielded against our enemies.
It forces a shift in the purpose of prayer, away from trying to control outcomes.
And towards cultivating trust in relationship.
Exactly. And that shift brings us directly to our next big idea, the concept of waiting. Because if God isn't a vending machine and the answer isn't immediate, then what are we supposed to be doing in the meantime?
We are in the waiting room, and this is section 3, drawing from Nancy Williams' work and the commentary on 1 Samuel.
And the first thing the source does is completely overhaul our definition of waiting.
Yes. Because most of us think of waiting as passive. It's what you do at the DMV, right? You sit there, you scroll on your phone, you waste time until your number is finally called.
It's a delay, it's a nuisance, it's empty time.
Right. But the source introduces the Hebrew word for waiting, which is kavah.
Kavah.
Yes, kavah. And it implies the complete opposite of passive waiting. The root meaning is related to tension, to twisting strands together to make a rope stronger. It's an active, engaged state of high tension and expectation.
So biblical waiting isn't sitting on your hands, it's braiding a rope. That's the metaphor.
That's the metaphor. It's actively binding yourself to God.
Yep.
It's a spiritual discipline. The source says waiting happens in the gap. That's the same gap we talked about before between what we know is true about God in our heads
That he is good, faithful, powerful.
and what we don't know is true about our specific life situation. When will I get a job? Will I ever get married? Will this illness end?
We live in that gap between the theology and the reality.
We all live in that gap. And the source identifies 3 common negative ways we typically waste that waiting time. 3 unhealthy responses to being in the gap.
Anger, anxiety, and apathy. The 3 A's.
The 3 A's. Anger demands action and control. It shakes its fist and says, why isn't this fixed yet? I need an answer now.
Been there.
Anxiety tries to think its way out of the gap. It ruminates, it spins scenarios, it plays out every worst-case possibility.
Definitely been there. I think I live there sometimes.
And then there's apathy. Apathy is the defense mechanism of, I don't care anymore. It's deciding to numb out because the pain of hoping and being disappointed is just too much to bear.
I think everyone listening can probably identify with at least one of those, if not all 3 at different times. I'm definitely an anxiety waiter. I try to Google my way out of every problem.
In Kavah, this idea of active expectant waiting is presented as the alternative to those 3. And the source gives us the ultimate case study for this, the story of Hannah from the book of 1 Samuel.
I love this story. It's so raw and so human. So set the stage for us. Where are we in history?
Okay, we are in the period of the judges in Israel. And the source doesn't mince words. It calls this time a moral cesspool. Society is chaotic, tribal, and falling apart at the seams. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
Not a great time to live.
Not at all. And into this chaos, the story zooms in on one family, a man named Elkanah and his 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah.
And right away, there is a central conflict.
A deeply painful one. Hannah is barren, which in that culture was a source of profound shame and grief. And the other wife, Peninnah, has children, and Peninnah is described as Hannah's rival. She provokes Hannah mercilessly year after year, making her life miserable because of her infertility.
It's just cruel. And Elkanah, the husband, bless his heart, he tries to help, but he fails pretty spectacular.
He really does. It's almost a textbook example of what not to say to someone who is grieving. He sees Hannah at the temple crying and refusing to eat, and he says this line, Hannah, why are you weeping? Am I not better to you than 10 sons?
Oh, Elkanah, read the room, buddy. He makes it about himself.
He completely makes it about himself. It's a classic example of misunderstanding the nature of the pain. He thinks her grief is about him or about a lack of affection. He doesn't get the specific, deep, existential need she has for a child and for vindication against her rival.
Yeah.
He offers logic and his own ego as a solution to her deep spiritual pain.
It just doesn't connect. So what does Hannah do? She doesn't lash out at him. She doesn't get into a fight with Peninnah.
No, she pivots.
Yeah.
And the source describes this as her turning her barrenness into bitterness, but not a toxic, resentful bitterness. It's a bitterness of soul, a holy desperation that she takes directly to God.
She doesn't stuff it down. She channels it.
She channels it into prayer. She goes to the temple and she prays so fervently, just moving her lips, that the priest, Eli, sees her and assumes she's drunk.
That's how intense it was.
That's how intense her kava was. She is pouring out her soul. She is in the weeds. She is binding herself to God in her desperation. And eventually, after this raw, honest prayer, God answers. She conceives and bears a son, Samuel.
It's a beautiful resolution. But here is the kicker from the source, the real theological insight. It argues that the delay, the years and years of painful waiting, was actually necessary.
Why? Why was the wait important?
Because Samuel wasn't just any kid. He would grow up to be the last judge and the first of the great prophets. He was the man who would bridge the gap between the chaotic time of the judges and the time of the kings. He was the one who would anoint King David.
It was about timing.
It was all about timing. The source argues that if Hannah had conceived immediately on her own schedule, Samuel would have been born too early to fulfill his specific historical destiny. The delay, as painful as it was for her, was necessary to align her personal desire with God's historical redemptive timing.
Wow. That is a profound point. It suggests that our personal waiting isn't always just about us and our timeline. It might be about how our lives fit into a much, much larger tapestry that we can't see from our vantage point.
Which brings us right back to that idea of the will of decree. We just can't see the whole plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hannah got her yes. But, and this is the hard pivot in our whole discussion, sometimes the answer is no. and it stays no.
And that leads us to our final section, section 4, the mystery of the thorn.
The Apostle Paul.
This is one of the biggest what-if questions in the entire Bible. In his second letter to the Corinthians, Paul talks about having this thorn in the flesh.
His exact words are, "A messenger of Satan to buffet me."
Which just sounds intense. To buffet you, to beat you up.
It is. It implies a constant harassing affliction.
But he never tells us what it is. It's this maddening mystery. And the sources we have, the Wikipedia entry and the Theological Journal, they go into full detective mode trying to solve it. What are the main theories?
Well, broadly, they fall into 3 categories. The first is physical, the second is spiritual, and the third is adversarial.
Okay, let's be detectives. Let's start with physical. What's the evidence?
So some scholars look for clues in Paul's other letters. In Galatians, he said something really interesting. He tells the church there, "If you could have done so, you would have torn out your eyes and given them to me."
Okay, that's a strong statement.
It is.
Yeah.
He also sometimes signs off on his letters by noting that he is writing in large letters, which could imply poor eyesight. So one of the leading theories is that he had a severe eye disease, maybe ophthalmia, that was painful and disfiguring.
That would be rough. Okay. What else in the physical category?
Malaria is another common one. The region he traveled in was rife with it, and it would cause recurring, debilitating fevers and headaches. That certainly fits the description of being buffeted or beaten down. Another is epilepsy. Some have suggested he had seizures, which for a public speaker and leader would be deeply humiliating and could be misinterpreted by observers.
That makes the messenger of Satan part make a bit more sense, if it felt like this external violent attack on his body. Okay, what about the spiritual theory?
This was a view held by Martin Luther, among others. The idea that the thorn wasn't a physical ailment, but an internal spiritual temptation. Specifically, the temptation to unbelief, to despair, to doubt God's goodness. A relentless mental battle.
That connects right back to the anxiety and panic attacks we were talking about at the beginning, the battle in the mind.
It does. It recasts it as a psychological or spiritual affliction. But then there's a third view, which the Theological Journal and our sources suggests is actually the most biblically consistent if you look at the language used in the Old Testament. This is the adversarial view.
The Old Testament view? What does that mean?
Right. So the argument is this. If you search for the phrase thorns in your sides or thorns in your eyes in the Old Testament, in books like Numbers, Joshua, Ezekiel, it never refers to a disease or a temptation.
What does it refer to then?
Every single time, it refers to enemies.
Huh.
Specifically, the Canaanites and other wicked nations that surrounded Israel and constantly harassed them. They were the thorns in Israel's side.
Okay, so if we apply that same metaphor to Paul.
The thorn wouldn't be a sickness or a feeling, it would be people. The false apostles or the persecutors who followed him from city to city, stirring up riots, undermining his ministry and attacking his character, a messenger of Satan sent to harass him and his work.
So the thorn is just people. People are the thorn.
It's a very strong possibility, and it fits the linguistic pattern of the Bible perfectly.
But here's the most important part of the story. Regardless of what it was, bad eyes, chronic depression, or human enemies, Paul prays for it to go away.
He does. He says he pleaded with the Lord 3 times. Remove this from me.
And God's answer is?
Not yes. The answer is, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.
That is the crux of this entire discussion right there.
It is. It's the ultimate theodicy, the ultimate explanation of God's ways in the midst of suffering. The source argues that the purpose of the thorn wasn't to destroy Paul. It was kenosis, a Greek word for emptying, for humility.
Unpack that.
Paul had had these unbelievable spiritual experiences. He says he was caught up to the third heaven. He was a spiritual giant. The source argues the thorn was given to him specifically to keep him from becoming conceited or exalted above measure.
To keep him grounded, to keep him humble.
Literally grounded, dependent. If Paul was superhumanly strong, perfectly healthy, and universally successful, he wouldn't need God's grace on a daily basis. The thorn, whatever it was, forced him to rely on God's strength, not his own, every single day.
So if we connect this all the way back to the With You in the Weeds podcast.
The weeds aren't always removed. Sometimes the answer to the prayer isn't, I will pull you out of the weeds. It is, I will give you the strength to exist and even flourish within the weeds.
And maybe, just maybe, you grow certain things in the weeds in that difficult soil that you could never grow in a perfectly manicured garden.
That is the synthesis of all these sources. That's the thread that ties them all together.
So let's bring this all home. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We really have.
We started with the modern psychology of stress, that panic and anxiety aren't necessarily spiritual failures, but human physiological responses that need to be managed with wisdom.
Then we looked at the rhetoric of prayer, that we can't treat God like a vending machine, and that an unanswered prayer might actually be a form of protection from our own selfish winner-loser mentality.
We looked at the discipline of waiting, redefining it not as a passive delay, but as kavah, an active, disciplined binding of ourselves to God, just like Hannah did in her deepest pain.
And we ended with the mystery of the thorn, the profound realization that some struggles are chronic, and their purpose might not be our destruction, but to deepen our dependency on grace.
The common theme running through all of this seems to be a fundamental shift in our understanding of control.
That's it. That's the whole thing. It's the shift away from trying to control outcomes. God, give me this specific job. Heal this sickness right now. Remove this thorn immediately. And towards trusting a person. It's moving from a transactional relationship to a relational one.
It's Hannah realizing she can't control her own womb, but she can pour out her heart to the one who can. It's Paul realizing he can't control the thorn, but he can learn to live powerfully through the grace he's given.
And it's a modern believer realizing that a panic attack isn't the end of their faith, but maybe it's a signal from their body to slow down, to ground themselves, and to seek connection with God in a new way.
It's heavy stuff, but it's also incredibly hopeful, I think. It means the struggle is the path. It's not an obstacle on the path. It's the path itself.
Exactly. The consistent argument from all these sources is that the Christian life isn't about escaping difficulty, it's about being transformed in it.
Before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to chew on. We talked about Sitzer's idea of the gift of unanswered prayer. And we talked about Paul's thorn being a messenger of Satan, but ultimately allowed by God for a good purpose.
Yes.
So if the thorn resulted in Paul's humility and a deeper experience of God's power, and if the unanswered prayer protected the mother in Tolstoy's story from a great tragedy, here is the question for you to think about. Are we currently praying for the removal of things from our lives that are actually the very tools keeping us grounded?
That is a provocative and slightly terrifying question.
Are we asking God to take away the very weight that is actually building the spiritual muscle we're going to need for the next season of our lives?
It forces you to look at your own weeds very differently. Maybe they aren't just choking the life out of the garden. Maybe they're an essential part of the ecosystem of your soul.
Something to mull over. Thank you for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.